Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to speak to all of you, and first of all, thank you to the presenters, to the organizers, and to Expoagro, not only for the invitation, but also for proving the House stabilization plan is working. Given that the number of people at the event rose by 33% compared to last year, so we are going up. I also want to thank the presence of Dr. Patricia Boric, who came to accompany me to this exhibition, and for her enormous work in supporting and defending the values of the Republic in all its aspects.
La presencia de la doctora Patricia Bullrich, que vino a acompañarme a esta exposición, y por su enorme trabajo sosteniendo y defendiendo los valores de la República.
I also want to thank Prof. Spara, who is the president of the Budget Commission of the Chamber of Deputies, who accompanied me last year and who is also doing a titanic encyclopedian task.
También quiero dar las gracias al queridísimo Prof. Esper, que es el presidente de la Comisión de Presupuesto de la Cámara de Diputados, que me acompañó el año pasado también y que también está haciendo
So, my thanks to them who have decided to accompany me today, and I also want to thank all the producers, whether they are big, medium or small, who daily serve the country by cultivating Argentine soil.
También quiero dar las gracias especialmente a todos los productores, ya sea grandes, medianos o pequeños, que diariamente sirven a la patria cultivando el suelo argentino.
Our soil has been blessed with the unique fertility in the world. Combined with Argentine ingenuity and with the liberal ideas of our constitution, it was during that good part of our history an inexhaustible source of prosperity for our country. I speak of when we were the world's great man, and we had nothing to envy in any world power. When we were a land of opportunities that attracted immigrants from all corners of the earth. When we were the first to eradicate illiteracy. When we had a total internal gross product superior to Brazil, Mexico, Paraguay and Peru together. In short, when we were that beacon of light that we want to be again today. In the center of that golden era, as a great protagonist and engine of the unprecedented prosperity, were the agricultural producers pulling the car. It was a time of the agro-export model, a time that was becoming more and more active as the country began to sink into misery thanks to the arrival of the nefarious model of social justice. This was not a coincidence. The systematical plan of losing the countryside was deliberately completed with its demonization by the politicians. At the same time, the forced distribution of wealth began to be established as an act of justice. And as a result of the implementation of this model, Argentina began a long descent into misery and poverty. That period that we call the century of Argentine humiliation. In simple words, when it was good for the countryside, it was good for the country. When the countryside was bad for Argentina, it was bad for Argentina too. And it was much worse when the political class began to see the countryside as an infinite mine of gold through which to finance its radical plan of expansion of the state. In other words, this happened when it began to believe that the countryside was making too much money. Money that was supposed to be used for better purposes, such as to finance industries, energy, to implement subsidies, cover-ups in the form of public employment, and to pay for any other delirious project of the turn-based politician. Basically, the prosperity of a political sector such as the agro-export model was used to finance deficitary and uncompetitive sectors. In the name of an absurd embezzlement, containing a national industry to replace imports would cost whatever it cost. Relying on the speech of the infant industry that had to be developed and making omission to the demand of the market. There is no doubt that this approach has failed. And enough proof is the oxymoron that our industry is the only infant of 90 years in the world. We learned by heart that it will never happen that an industry touches the door of the national government and says, "Thank you for your help. Now I'm ready to compete." The market would open. That clearly does not happen. So we're going to rush it. That's how we get the fit out of the field. But even though for centuries politics decided to deny the law of gravity, it is time to recognize that the only truth is reality, as their famous politician in our history said. It is false that industrial development should be trampled on the field. That was only one of the many arguments of the cast to drown them in taxes and regulations, because there is no contradiction between field and industry. Expoagro is a solid proof that industrialization and technological innovation are a natural consequence of the successful development of primary activity. Only a harvester involves hundreds of different economic sectors, from metallurgy to the development of software. And the same applies to all the technological development of the sector. If we review history, the greatest period of industrial expansion in Argentine history was during the agro-export model, and not as they wanted to install the politicians of the past with a failed model of the substitution of imports. It is also a lie that the field does not generate added value, given that the work of the sector is to add value to the soil, to efficientize and multiply the production of food. Thanks to direct sowing and genetic innovation, which Argentina has always been a proud protagonist, today we can produce food for 500 million human beings. It is a true miracle, and it could be hundreds of millions more if we remove the weight of the state above. Another of the great lies spread by the cast is that the agro does not generate jobs when, according to data from last year, the participation of the agro-industrial sector in formal employment is approximately 25%, including processing of its raw materials, trade and derivative services. But still, despite the afflicting weight of the state, which even tried to carry out the nefarious Resolution 125 to plunder it as never before, the sector continues to be competitive all over the world. Let's imagine then how much more could be achieved with the state that does not hinder. Our government is the first in a long time, or perhaps in Argentine history, that rejects the idea of the state as a mechanism of compulsive appropriation of other people's wealth. In fact, we are in the antipodes of this thought. We have come to limit the arbitrary power of the government and to free the private sector. And of course, we have come to take the weight of the state from the backs of the producers. It is because we know that a small state is equivalent to a large society, because we know that prosperity grows indefinitely in the hands of freedom, and in this case of the freedom of the agricultural sector, and because we understand that entrepreneurs are social benefactors, and that their search for profit lies in a benefit for the whole of society. And it was with that same north that we faced all the steps taken during our first year of government, which I will go over to list some of them. I say because it is interesting, right? Because how are you, Niklaus? How are you? Because last year we talked about if they were promises, but now we are talking about concrete facts that we have achieved. So it seems interesting to me to do these stories in a more forceful way. And, for example, the first objective was always clear, and it was to order the macroeconomics, so that all Argentines could start enjoying a better economic past. Thus we saw a remarkable reduction in inflation, such as the exchange rate, which was located around 200%, punishing the profitability of all of you, forcing you to access assets at a very high dollar and forcing you to sell your production at a very low dollar. Today the same gap is around 15% with a special regime for exports, through which up to 20% of the exports can be liquidated at free value. I remember during the campaign and when I spoke with the representatives of the sector, clearly there were two very marked issues, and one was the gap and the other were the returns. And if we put it in quantitative terms, the issue of the gap was much more significant, since the gap rounded around 200%. It was a 3-to-1 relationship. This does not mean that I do not consider the returns to be an aberration. What I'm saying is that in terms of magnitude, the problem was much more important. And one of the things that I committed was to order the macroeconomics and to pulverize the gap. In fact, we assumed with an inflation that traveled at the rate of 17,000% per year, that is 54% per month, which was the wholesale inflation. And today, let's say, the wholesale inflation in the last part of 2024, in fact, traveled below 2%, and in terms of dollars, we were in deflation in recent months. In fact, when we made the stabilization plan with a cut in public spending of 15 points on the GDP, 5 on the Treasury and 10 on the central bank, they said it was impossible to do, and what we did. We solved the problem of the Treasury in a month. We solved the problem of the central bank in 6 months. As a result of that stabilization, they told us that the level of activity was going to be destroyed, that the poor were going to multiply in an impossible way. And however, none of that happened. We said that we were going to recover in a short time. And indeed, the recovery was in a short time. And when one takes the GDP stationed in the monthly version, we finished 5% above the year 2023. And the poverty, after the initial sincerity that came to climb in the monthly frequency, measured by the University of Chocosa de Isla, which methodologically is the same as what money does, what the UCA does, and what we do in human capital and in the index. Nothing more than they are different forms of frequencies if they are taken in monthly. Let's say trimestral, or let's say trimestral. Let's say that number of 57% went to 33% in the last state of monthly frequency. That is to say that poverty fell in 24 percentage points. It is impressive, but it is more impressive when we think that as a result of this stabilization in order, we managed to get more than 10 million Argentines out of poverty. And that is also a huge achievement that I think is worth mentioning. At the same time, it is no coincidence that during our first year of government, the demand of credit for agricultural machinery has increased by 50% compared to the previous year. Just before entering this room, I was talking with Salvador de Stefano, who is here. And he told me that yesterday, the Banco Nación. What are you doing? How are you? You are fine. Now I see you. I think there were more than 100 meters of queue. And we had given the credits. 200. Well, that's fine, even better. More for me, more as a result. So, well, it's good that they see how they are being supported, and that this is giving a very important engine to one of the pillars of what is our model of expansion. So that is also a good sign, because when we assumed hyperinflation was discussed, and they even returned the mortgage credits of 30 years, well, every day looks more like a miracle, which in reality has nothing to do with miracles. It's just applying the good economic theory. It is also no coincidence that agro-industrial exports have grown 56% in volume and 26% in invoice, or that last month we saw export bond for more than 7 million tons of grains and derivatives. Nor is it by chance that the Southern Surface in the campaign of 24-25 has grown almost 20%, exceeding any previous record. But it is due to a firm commitment on our part to run to the state of business so that it stops hindering those who produce. In just 1 year, we repealed and simplified more than 350 bureaucratic rules that attacked the generation of value. We repealed the rules in Sinosa and in the NAs. We eliminate useless legal declarations. We exterminated forever prohibitions and coups, and the export of grains and meat. We eliminate femicides and maximum prices for food. We reduce the import of fertilizers, herbicides, and irrigation systems. We also begin to put into practice the free competition of currencies that we promised, offering the first credits in liters of milk for dams. and now in kilos of cotton for porcine producers. This is very interesting. One of the things that we had proposed throughout the campaign was to go to a system of competition of currencies. Obviously, as everything is to fund in the campaign, they called it dollarization. And in reality, one of the things that I explained is that the system of competition of currencies works as a system of currency baskets, where unlike the baskets of currencies administered by a central bank, which is determined by the central bank, in this case it is endogenously determined by the decisions of the individuals. And that also explained that the currency, in reality, did not have to be the dollar or the euro. It could be any currency, but that there were other cases where the currency could be, for example, for an oil company, it could be the WTI. Let's say for someone who is in the gas sector, let's say the B2U, let's say in clearly, for example, for the field that could be side or any of the products in such a way. This is very important because the risk of dollarization is eliminated. And by eliminating the risk of dollarization, he go to a business that has less risk. Therefore, it has a low rate of discount, and that allows you to amplify the value. And that value amplification is seen, let's say, when you expand the capital base, with which you not only produce more, but you also generate employment, and also the economy grows. Therefore, this of also eliminating this type of risk basically makes there is greater prosperity. And so I could stay until Sunday, enumerating the things we did, and we think about continuing to improve the competitiveness of the sector. What I say could be clearly until Sunday is not a metaphor. One of the things that began to happen when we reviewed the networks is that we were publishing things that we were doing. In that context, we found that we gave a lot of satisfaction by the people and saying, this is much more than I voted. So one of the things that I created to the brilliant speaker that I have, he was Manuel Adorni, and thank you for joining us here. How nice today I came surrounded by people who irritate everywhere. They are going to say, this is a provocateur, I love it. Apart from that, then we clearly had made a government program, a proposal, that basically said it was impossible to do. I mean, each of the things that we said we wanted to do, they said it was impossible. And not only that, but there are not few measures. There were many and very demanding, which, let's say, in the double dimension was very complicated. And there one of the things that we see is that what Manuel did was measure what degree of progress we had. So if in the 25% of what the government period has, let's say the first year of these 4, I mean, I got bullied. Let's say if we have fulfilled the 25% of the promises, we would be fine to put it in some way. And what Manuel's work revealed is that we met the 78% of the promises. But also we did something that we had not planned to do. And in that context, when one incorporates these things that we did even when they were not planned to do, basically the degree of fulfillment is 97%. I mean, from passing from governments that promised things and did nothing. We went to a very demanding program where only in a quarter of the period we fulfilled 97% of the promises. Wow, that's really hard work. I'm going to make some generic comments about the terms of the campaign, because I think they are important. I was very clear, without a doubt, about what the campaign was about, because in terms of tax policy, we were talking about the motorbike. Today, the motorbike is a global emblem of economic policy. In fact, in the case of the work that causes is doing, the person that I have as a minister, Luis Federer, has created a model of export. In terms of deregulation, Toto Caputo was elected the best minister of economy in the world. In the most prestigious universities in the world, we talk about how it could be that we made such an adjustment, and instead of being hyper-contracted and sinking into a Great Depression, we came out with so much strength. At the same time, in the monetary plan, we identified with the deregulation, and then people went with dollars. With my face. They were quite nice. In foreign policy, we said that we were going to align ourselves with the United States and Israel, and I think it is clear that we are fulfilling it. And I left for the end something very specific, which is the issue of security. Because not by chance, my slogan coincided with someone who competed with me, and that is greatness, allowed this government to be added, which was in terms of security. The one who does it pays for it. The good ones are the blue ones, and the sons of bitches who walk with rags on their faces and break cars, burn cars, and threaten everyone because they don't want to lose their jobs. These are the bad ones, and those are the ones who have to go to jail, and we are going to put them in jail. We are going to defend the Republic, because it is not that they come against me, they come for you. I am alone in the middle. So imagine that if you accelerated the curves, now I'm going to accelerate much more. Going back to the speech, we do all this because it is our duty to apply again the ideas that 100 years ago, the richest country in the world, made of Argentina. For that we need to understand, among all of us, that we must think about Argentina in general, that we must think about Argentina in generations, with the intention that our actions in the present have a positive impact on future generations. Be willing to plant trees, that we may not enjoy the shade. The countryside has this mentality, but not the political class, and the imposition of the caste model ran more than 5 generations, with their ridiculous interventions. This is also very interesting, because Argentina clearly could become one of the 5 world powers in a period of 40 years. They forget the ideas, and sometimes there are people who say, no, but that is a long time. Look, the most interesting is that 2/3 of that improvement happens in 1/3 of the time, in a period that can go 10 or 15 years. We can see wonderful things. What we have to do is put the will and have the will to embrace the ideas of freedom and move forward. Clearly, embracing the ideas of freedom ends with the work of a lot of criminals who are the ones who later organize marches. Remember that every time you see someone in a march, it is because we ended up cutting his job. What they have seen these days is the politics. When they say, where did the adjustment fall? Look at us who kick and you will see where the adjustment fell. It fell on those who have ruined Argentina, and we are not going to stop, because we govern for the good Argentines, for those who want to live from the fruit of their work, not for the criminals. Because when we stop being the richest country in the world, because we stopped embracing these ideas, we became 50% of the poor And we become the first country in the world to eradicate illiteracy, to have the high school students who do not know how to read or do basic math. That is why we need to make the changes in a painful way, in a fast way, without taking into account its urgency. We understand the imperative need to lower tension, but it is no use to anyone to lower than to get political credit with the elections, and then the model breaks down and we have to put them back, as it has happened in other governments. We want to eliminate the CPO and retention forever, and that the country can sustain without being, let's say, without leaching its most productive sector. But for it to be sustainable, we have to do it in the right way, so that in the future, no tax degenerate will come to pay his whole arm in his pocket again. We have already lowered 20% of the retention to the main parts of the country, and we completely eliminate them for the regional economies. And as the virtuous path of tax and low spending continue to be consolidated, we will continue to lower them until they reach zero and stay there once and for all. At the same time, to understand why it is so important, on the one hand, because it allows us to lower taxes and retain productivity to the private sector. On the other hand, because it allows us to face unexpected situations and unpredictable tragedies, such as the temporal in Bahía Blanca in the last few days. Thanks to the tax superávit, we were able to send 200,000 million pesos to the city to help them get back on their feet. If the superávit had not existed, we would have had to print money, linking a salary to all Argentinians, with inflation and increasing poverty in the process. This is very interesting, because while some take advantage of the misfortunes as a political parties are the politicians that have impoverished us throughout history. Of the 8 ministries that we have, 6 were working actively to help Bahía Blanca. From the first day, Dr. Bellet was in charge of the security forces. Dr. Pete was in charge of defense. From the first day, they were working. In those moments of greater emergency, where the situation was more complicated, where everything was, that seemed like chaos, they went to order. And not only that, but also, the aid came from the Ministry of Human Capital, and also the Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Health basically even collaborated by building a hospital, like a campaign hospital. And not only that, but also the Minister Caputo, with the Secretary of Finance, Kieberman, worked intensively to find how we could make money to be able to give the emergency to Bahía Blanca. And that's how we managed to reassign parties and get resources for 200,000 million pieces. So one many talk, make for no, and continue to spend on nonsense, like, let's say, bribe media with official guidelines, down journalists, spend on wooden planks, and an easy and all that. We put the resources where people need them to solve the specific problems, other people. At the same time, let's say, I need to mention one more ministry, which is the Chancellery, where in lies of the support we receive from abroad. We are also working to see how we can provide more help. I mean, once the crisis situation and the most urgent situation were overcome, and where we had to start the road of reconstruction. That was the moment in which I could go, because if I had done it before, I would have been disturbing. They would have put a very nice picture, but we would have made them lose a lot of time to each of the groups assigned to solve those problems in a moment. I say, because this is like this, believe me, it's like this. If I go on the first day, each of the groups have to explain to me what they have to do. Therefore, that task can take at least 5 hours, and every minute counts to save human lives. Therefore, I had to choose between the nice picture and the politics or saving lives. I preferred to save lives. Others preferred the nice pictures. In turn, that's why our focus is also on reducing the costs as quickly and as deeply as possible to increase the superprofit. And this must be done in the provinces and the municipalities, not only at the national level. Argentina is no longer going to tolerate this game of political scourges, of raising taxes to eat the profitability that remains available with the tax reduction that we do from the nation. So I want to dedicate a reflection, let's say, to reflect on those governors. Let's say, take this perverse game that they ask for tax cuts and claim tax cuts. And when the time comes to do it on their own, they don't do it. They don't raise it. So, be clear about that. That is, we said that we were going to lower taxes, and we lowered more than 3 taxes, including the inflationary tax, which for seniority is 15 points from the GDP. Therefore, part of our duty is to protect the citizenship of this cynicism that has served politics for a long time. For this reason, we want to return to a truly federal model in which there is tax competition between the provinces and the private sector, in discern the cost of working in such or such district, and what returns and services it receives in return, so that politicians stop hiding behind the prices of goods and services, and in co-participation and the fiscal voracity of the state apparatus that they want to sustain is evident. For example, one of the things that happened to me when I met Elon Musk, I went to his Tesla plant that is in Austin, Texas, but before it was in Los Angeles. And why did it go? Because of the taxes. I mean, there was a Hungarian economist whose name was Tiba, and he said, vote with your feet. So, we are going to open the tax competition so that both companies and individuals can vote with their feet and get rid of the political thieves who only want to steal the fruit of their work. For this reason, we want to return to a truly federal model in which there is a tax competition between the provinces and the private sector can discern the cost of working in such or such district and what returns and services it receives in return, so that politicians stop hiding. I had already said this. I repeat it because it is good to repeat it. Thank you, expert. Let's say a professor with descendants. No, you have to lower a point there, expert. I would have learned it to a student. Well, thank you. Then I repeat it, as I had said, so that politicians stop hiding in the prices of goods and services, and in co-participation, and that the tax avoidance of the state apparatus they want to sustain remains in evidence. The place of arrival for this, and for all our reforms, is conceptually simple. It should be easy for the one who does things right, and it should be much more difficult for the one who does things wrong. A society in which doing the right is simple, and acting incorrectly is expensive, very expensive, and the one who does it pays for it. In short, that inverted model is over, in which honest workers fight to survive month after month, and living parasites have ensured honorable life for generations. That model in which victims are treated as victims and victims treated as victims. That model that was tired of reviewing the past because it could not promise any future. In our first year, we made it clear that our government will mark a turning point for our great nation because for the first time in decades, we look forward to thinking about how to grow, instead of how to distribute an increasingly small profit. We left behind the mentality of scarcity to see the world again under the eyes of abundance, and Argentina as the most abundant country in the world. We have the most fertile land on the planet and the best human capital, so we learned to get water out of it to the rocks. Now we have to get the weight of the backpack of the cast off our backs to be the great nation that we already know how to be. I wish you a great day. May the forces of the heaven be with us, and long life freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.